23 to 28. Listen to a talk on beavers' decision-making.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about decisions. Decision-making is a part of our everyday life, right? I mean, you made a decision to come to class today, a decision as to what you ate, and a decision about what clothes you're wearing. Here's the question I want to ask, though. Is decision-making a purely human capability, or can animals do it too? To narrow things down a bit, let's focus on the behavior of beavers. Why did I choose beavers to look at? Put simply, because they make dams. Dam making is a highly complex behavior that allows beavers to build a dwelling that's protected from predators and provides them with safe access to food sources. Dams cause a stream or river to flood, and the beaver lives in a shelter called a lodge in the middle of the flooded region that develops. They make their dams primarily from trees, and if you've ever seen a picture of a beaver before, you can guess how they do it. They use those giant teeth of theirs to gnaw away at the tree's trunk until it falls, and then they cut it up and drag it back or float it downstream to the place they're building the dam. We can already see that there's a decision to be made. The beaver has to decide which trees to cut down and which ones to leave. They have to consider tree size, distance to the tree, ease of transport, the tree location's exposure to predators, lots of variables. Beavers like aspens, willows, and pines, but that could be a genetically programmed preference. In terms of selecting a specific tree, though, well, there was an experiment done a few years ago that dealt with this. A controlled environment was set up where there was a small group of 3 trees relatively nearby and a large single tree quite a bit of distance away, maybe 3 or 4 times farther away than the close ones. What would you do in this situation? Let's take a look at the pros and cons. If the beaver chooses the closer trees, it limits the danger of predators because the beavers can quickly jump in the water to avoid them, since the predators typically can't swim. Going far away from their lodge, their home, exposes them to more danger. Also, we can think of energy expenditure. A beaver is going to use up much more energy trying to drag a huge tree across a large distance than it would by chopping down and carrying 3 small ones. It seems obvious to me which decision to make, yet the beavers in the experiment always went for the single tree. I'm not sure why. It's likely a result of genetic programming.
But don't beavers build their dams at night? Doesn't that put them in danger of predators?
Right. Think about which animals hunt beavers. Wolves, coyotes, wolverines. These are all nocturnal animals. They're awake at night. And if they're awake, chances are they're hunting. This goes to show us, again, that beavers do what they're programmed to do and don't actually think, even if a behavior appears complex. If they could, they'd likely build their dams during the day and rest at night, nodding off to sleep in their island-like lodges.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 23. What does the professor mainly discuss? (24) According to the lecture, what purpose does a dam serve? (25) According to the lecture, what is true of beavers when finding dam building materials? 26. What does the professor say about the beaver's predators? 27. What are two disadvantages of beavers choosing the far tree in the experiment? 28. What do beavers and their predators have in common?
29 to 34. Listen to part of a lecture from an art history class. The professor is discussing Renaissance art.
I'd like to pick up where we left off yesterday. The visual arts in Renaissance Europe. There were various painting techniques used during this period. Of course, oil painting is probably the most famous. But I want to start with another type of painting, the fresco. This technique isn't used much these days, so you might not be familiar with it. Just so you know the basics, let me briefly outline the process. It starts with putting wet plaster on the wall. And, plaster was basically a mixture of sand, water, and lime at this time. Next, the artist applies water-based paint to the plaster. When paint is applied to plaster, a chemical reaction occurs. This causes the paint to bond with the plaster. The paint actually becomes a part of the wall rather than just covering it. As a result, it is very difficult to fix any mistakes. The paint can't just be wiped off or painted over. Another challenge is that the color of the paint changes significantly as the plaster dries. So an artist can't be sure what a section of the painting will look like until it is finished. Despite these disadvantages, Renaissance artists used the fresco technique to create many stunning works of art. And while the styles of these paintings vary greatly, they all share a couple of key features. Let's take a look at an example. Michelangelo's large paintings on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel are the most well-known frescoes. But my personal favorite is Raphael's The School of Athens. The majority of frescoes from this period deal with religious themes. But the School of Athens is different. It's not a religious scene. It depicts over 20 scholars from ancient Greece and Rome standing together in a room. People like Plato and Aristotle. Here, let me put a picture up on the screen. I'm sure the first thing that strikes you is the bright contrasting colors. I mean, just look at the robes the figures are wearing. Most of them are bright green, red, blue, or yellow. These are the colors that were typically used in Renaissance frescoes. There's a practical reason for this. You see, the lime in plaster is corrosive. It can actually destroy many of the natural pigments that Renaissance artists used to make their paints. But the pigments that produce the colors I just mentioned are not affected by lime. Now, since the paint was immediately absorbed by the plaster, well, this meant that the artist couldn't really blend different colors together. So each part of the plaster was usually painted only one color. That's why the transitions between the colors in this painting are so sudden. Again, look at the robes. There's none of the gradual blending you'd see in an oil painting. Okay, Another thing about this fresco is that many of the people seem to have, I guess you could say, dark, intense eyes. This is because Raphael took advantage of the fact that he was painting on wet plaster. He used his brush to to press down on the plaster whenever he painted someone's eyes, so they appeared deeper and, more distinct than the rest of the face. This was a common practice when painting a fresco. Artists often did this to create a three-dimensional effect that added emphasis. For example, some painters would push the plaster down around an important figure. This caused the person to stand out more prominently than the other parts of the painting.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
29. What is the main topic of the lecture? 30. What are the disadvantages of the fresco method? 31. What distinguishes the School of Athens from other Renaissance frescoes? 32. Why were only certain colors used when painting a fresco? 33. What does the professor say about the color transitions in the School of Athens? 34. How did artists make certain elements of a fresco more noticeable?